They were there for nearly a decade, face of stability in a franchise built on chaos. And then, suddenly, gone. No final episode, no farewell post, no update, no spin-off, not even a one-line mention during reunions. Loren and Alexei didn't exit the 90 Day Fiancé universe, they were erased. Viewers didn't get closure, they got silence. And in reality television, silence isn't calm, it's calculated. The network didn't forget them. It made a decision. And that decision wasn't random. I'm Sabrina, and this is TLC Drama Live. If you're as stunned by their disappearance as we are, hit that subscribe button and drop your thoughts in the comments because what we're about to unpack is bigger than Loren and Alexei. It's about how silence operates like a script when real people become content. Loren and Alexei weren't controversial. They weren't messy. They didn't throw drinks or flip tables. They got married, had 3 kids, navigated postpartum, and dealt with Tourette's awareness on camera. They were real, relatable, and for a long time, the emotional anchor TLC used to balance the franchise's wilder storylines. They were the calm in the storm, until the storm swallowed them whole. And that's exactly where this gets disturbing. Because when messy couples disappear, it's usually scandal. But when quiet ones vanish, it's strategy. The network didn't need a meltdown. It needed a blank space. And they gave them one. Not because they failed, but because they didn't keep feeding the algorithm. If stability no longer sells, what happens to the people who represent it? This isn't about fame chasing. It's not even about whether Loren and Alexei wanted to continue. This is about how a couple went from being everywhere, featured on Pillow Talk, on posters, on streaming thumbnails, to absolutely nowhere without a single word from TLC. Nothing was announced. Nothing was explained, which tells you everything. Because when networks want you to care, they give you a goodbye montage. When they want you to forget, they give you nothing. The silence is the decision. The erasure is the message. And the audience is left wondering if they missed something, when in fact, they were never supposed to notice. But viewers noticed anyway. Reddit noticed. Instagram noticed. Longtime fans started asking why TLC's model couple hadn't been seen in over a year. Still, no answer. No tweets, no shade. Not even a breadcrumb. And that's when people started digging. Not just into Loren and Alexei's feed, but into the system itself. The contracts. The rules. The silence that isn't just post-show awkwardness, but enforced invisibility. Because that's what most people don't realize. When you're signed to a reality contract, even your silence is part of the show. And when the show decides you're no longer useful, that silence becomes permanent. So what actually happened behind the scenes? Why would a network willingly cut ties with 2 of its most recognizable faces, especially ones that made them look good? That's the question TLC doesn't want you asking. Because the answer isn't about Loren or Alexei. It's about control. It's about who gets to keep their voice once the cameras stop rolling. And who doesn't. And once you see how it's done, you won't just be watching the next cast, you'll be counting the seconds until someone else disappears. Loren and Alexei were never cast as drama. They were cast as proof. Proof that the show could produce real love, real families, real connection. In a franchise known for chaos, they became the couple that made viewers feel safe. Their storyline had emotion, but not explosions. Struggle, but not scandal. And TLC used that. Every time another relationship spiraled into screaming matches or cheating accusations, Loren and Alexei were there to remind everyone that not all hope was lost. They were the control group, the emotional reset, the couple you could root for without cringing. And for years, that made them essential. But that's exactly the problem. They didn't change. The chaos kept escalating, more outrageous fights, more shocking betrayals, more viral blow-ups, and Loren and Alexei stayed consistent. Viewers still like them, sure, but networks don't survive on likes. They survive on numbers. clicks, reactions, engagement spikes. And the truth is, consistency doesn't spike anything. When every new couple is fighting for attention with tears, threats, or twisted backstories, a couple that communicates like adults starts to feel quiet, not boring, just not loud enough to compete. When the formula changes, even the success stories become obsolete. And this wasn't a couple who suddenly lost popularity. Loren had a thriving social media presence. Their kids were fan favorites. Their pillow talk commentary was often the only grounded voice in the room. But behind all that visibility was a shift viewers didn't see coming. A quiet recalibration inside the franchise. Because what once made them valuable, stability, relatability, long-term investment, started making them expensive, inflexible, and low impact from a metric standpoint. The loyalty they earned didn't translate into viral heat. The trust they built didn't generate new controversy. In a content economy that thrives on risk and speed, Loren and Alexei were a long-term play in a short-term system. So the question isn't why they disappeared, it's why the network stopped needing them. And the answer starts with how the definition of value changed. For years, TLC sold us Loren and Alexei as proof that 90 Day Fiancé wasn't all mess. That it could create real love, real family, real growth. But when that growth didn't spark drama, the network didn't protect it. It pivoted away from it. Quietly, strategically, without warning. And it left the audience to feel like the couple ghosted, when in reality, the ghosting was coming from inside the house. That's why the silence hits harder. Not because fans didn't see it coming, but because fans were told this couple represented the show's heart. So when they vanished without a trace, it wasn't just about two people. It was about what the network thinks you're paying attention to. Because if they believed you still cared, they would have given you closure. They would have used that loyalty. Instead, they bet on your forgetfulness. And that's where trust breaks. Not with betrayal, but with quiet edits that rewrite who matters. Now the real discomfort sets in. Because if Loren and Alexei can be phased out without notice, what does that say about every other cast member trying to build a future with this brand? What happens when being the most consistent, most grounded, most supportive couple on the roster becomes the very reason you're no longer invited back? Behind every loving glance on camera, every baby update, every quiet night on the couch filmed for the franchise, there's a contract. A thick one. One that doesn't just say what you can film, but what you can say, what you can earn, and what happens when you stop being useful. Most viewers assume reality TV is just cameras following people around. In truth, it's closer to a controlled environment where every word, every post, every paycheck is filtered through a system that protects the brand first, and the people second. Loren and Alexei signed up like everyone else. But after nearly a decade of loyalty and visibility, something changed. Not in their behavior, but in what they wanted. Because after giving TLC multiple pregnancies, full-time filming, spin-offs, public exposure, and brand alignment, the Bravarniks allegedly started questioning the terms. Not with threats, not with rebellion, but with the kind of questions any working adult would ask after years of unpaid overtime. Is this worth it? Are we allowed to take outside deals? Why does everyone around us profit while we're still stuck in year one conditions? What they were asking, in plain terms, was whether loyalty meant anything inside a system built to move on. And that's where trouble starts. Not when cast members act out, but when they start reading the fine print. Power only shifts when people realize they're allowed to ask. The contracts used in this franchise aren't just agreements to appear on TV. They're muzzles. They control timing, exposure, even what cast members can say after they're no longer under contract. Public statements are off limits. Outside brand deals are restricted. Earnings from the show don't scale with audience growth. And, most importantly, the silence isn't optional, it's enforced. You don't hear from people like Loren and Alexei after they disappear, not because they have nothing to say, but because they're not legally allowed to say it. Their brand is tied to the show's brand. And the moment they want to stand on their own, the contract becomes the wall. That's why renegotiation is treated like rebellion. Because once a couple has been around long enough to understand the system, their questions become dangerous. They stop being passive participants and start becoming a risk. Loren and Alexei, by all accounts, weren't difficult, but they were experienced. And experience gives you leverage. Unless the people in charge decide you no longer matter, then you're not a partner. You're a line item. You become someone easier to phase out than to pay more. And once that decision is made, silence isn't just the outcome, it becomes the tool. It protects the franchise from exposure. It keeps fans confused. It allows the network to move forward without backlash. And it prevents the cast from telling their side. Because no matter how public their journey once was, the moment they want to speak independently, the reality of those contracts kicks in. Silence is safer. For the brand, not the person, not the family, not the fans left wondering where their favorite couple went. So, did Loren and Alexei walk away quietly? Or did they ask for something they were never meant to receive? More space? More voice? More fairness? Or maybe freedom? The kind that doesn't come with a mic pack or a daily schedule. The kind that doesn't need permission to speak. And that's the kind this system is designed to prevent. The moment you sign your name to a reality show, you stop being a person and start becoming data. Everything you say, every pause, every argument, every kiss, it all becomes numbers. Watch time, retention rate, clip potential, social shares, viewer comments. Algorithms don't care about how healthy your relationship is. They care about whether your relationship keeps strangers watching. And TLC, like every major reality machine, feeds those numbers into decisions. Who returns? Who gets spin-offs? Who gets quietly replaced? It's not personal. It's performance. And Loren and Alexei's performance started being measured against a standard they were never designed to meet. Because they weren't the fire starters. They weren't the ones dragging each other across tell-alls or leaking DMs on Instagram. They were consistent, relatable, respectful. And in the early years of 90 Day Fiancé, that worked. It gave viewers relief. But as the franchise grew more extreme, with newer cast getting messier, louder, younger, and more explosive, Loren and Alexei stopped being the norm and started becoming the exception. And that's not good in an ecosystem built on constant shock. Stability might earn love, but it doesn't spike engagement. And in this business, love without metrics is almost worthless. When loyalty can't be measured in clicks, it stops counting. Producers track audience sentiment, yes, but they also track what drives return views. And chaos, for better or worse, always does. A toxic couple can trend for weeks. A cheating scandal guarantees reposts. A fight over nothing can anchor a whole episode if it's loud enough. But Loren and Alexei? They were having parenting discussions, medical updates, real-life marriage dynamics, and eventually, those things didn't make it past the edit. Not because they weren't valuable, but because they didn't ignite the right metrics. And when engagement flattens, leverage vanishes. That's what turns a headliner into background noise. Quietly, efficiently, without announcement. Their storyline was still resonating for people who saw themselves in them. But that's not the same as being viral. The shift didn't happen all at once. It came slowly, in less screen time, fewer updates, no new appearances. Fans assumed they were just taking a break. But the numbers had already spoken. Not enough clicks. Not enough drama. Not enough reason to keep paying a veteran couple when new ones would work for less and cause more chaos. Predictability stopped being safe. It started being a liability. And that's when everything flips. Because if you're not driving engagement, you're driving up cost. Networks do the math. Long-term cast expect more control, more pay, more voice. But if they're not bringing in fresh viewers or keeping existing ones on edge, they become easy to cut. Not with a fight. Not with a storyline. Just silence. And no one sees the moment it happens. Because there is no moment. There's only data. There's only trend lines. There's only the reality that someone else is always ready to fill your slot with a louder, riskier, more unpredictable storyline. So, who makes that call? Who gets to decide when your family stops being relevant to the audience you helped build? Is it an exec in a boardroom? A focus group breakdown? A line on a spreadsheet that says your segment didn't hold attention past minute 8? Or is it the audience, clicking away slowly, without knowing that every skipped scene might be the last time that couple gets airtime? That's the part that hurts. Because it's not about whether Loren and Alexei mattered to viewers. It's about whether they still delivered for the system built to monetize every second of their lives. Most 90-day Fiancé exits don't come with warning shots. They don't come with statements or closure or even a one-line mention in passing. They just stop. Someone who was on your screen for years is suddenly gone, not even aware they now clip. And what you get instead is silence. A silence so specific, so polished, it doesn't feel like absence. It feels like erasure, the kind that's meant to look accidental when it's anything but. Loren and Alexei aren't the first to vanish without a word. And if this pattern holds, they won't be the last. Because the franchise doesn't deal in exits. It deals in disappearances. When other longtime cast members started pushing back on contracts, on control, on how their stories were being framed, those stories didn't get resolved. They got buried. Sometimes they made cryptic comments later. Sometimes they were seen working on other projects. But the show never acknowledged the change. And the audience was left to guess, the same way they're guessing now. That's not carelessness. It's strategy. Because when you give someone a dramatic exit, you give them the power to control the narrative. But when you give them nothing, you own the silence. Silence is not neutral. It's scripted. That's why Loren and Alexei's vanishing act feels so familiar. It follows the same rhythm that's been used before. Tension builds behind the scenes. Cast raises questions. Network quietly stops featuring them. Public confusion rises. Network says nothing. Cast says nothing. And the absence itself becomes the answer. It's a slow fade that creates just enough doubt to confuse the audience and protect the brand. Because if no one officially leaves, no one can accuse the network of pushing them out. If no one speaks, then legally, nothing happened. It's not censorship. It's containment. The few cast members who found ways to speak, years later, inside interviews, under blurred legal lines, often describe the exact same thing. Control contracts that extend long past filming. End clauses so tight, they don't expire for years. Language so broad it covers not just what you say, but what you imply. It's not about preventing gossip. It's about maintaining the illusion that everything you saw on screen is still true off-screen. That happy couples stayed happy. That explosive breakups were personal, not produced. That nobody negotiated, argued, or demanded better treatment. But the more you study how the show moves, the more you start noticing the gaps. The way certain cast members vanish right after questioning something. The way couples disappear mid-season with no follow-up. The way social media goes quiet and fans are left refreshing pages, looking for any clue. And the pattern doesn't shift. It just repeats. Every time. Different names, same silence. And that's when you have to ask, what else has been removed? Without explanation. If Loren and Alexei's exit followed a pattern, how many others were edited out of their own endings? How many stories were rewritten by simply not airing the final scenes? Because if absence is now the franchise's way of ending chapters, then silence isn't just suspicious, it's confirmation. You don't need drama when invisibility works better. And for a network this experienced, quiet isn't failure. Quiet is policy. One day, you're filming diaper changes and bedtime routines with producers in your living room. The next, you're watching your own name vanish from episode guides like it was never there. That's not closure. That's disorientation. Loren and Alexei didn't just lose screen time. They lost control of the story they helped build for nearly a decade. Imagine spending years showing your most vulnerable moments. Births, panic attacks, marriage fights, therapy sessions, only to wake up and realize none of it belonged to you. The footage was yours emotionally, but legally, it never was. And when it's gone, you don't even get the right to explain why. When someone breaks up with you, at least you get an ending. But when a network phases you out, all you're left with is a silence that keeps asking questions you're not allowed to answer. Loren and Alexei gave fans their full reality. And that reality didn't get a send-off. It got locked behind non-disclosure clauses and release forms. What makes that worse is not the loss of fame, it's the loss of voice. The slow unraveling of your ability to comment on your own life. And when you're silent in public for too long, people start telling the story for you. That's where the damage multiplies. Silence doesn't just erase you, it replaces you. Fans speculate. Gossip grows. People assume you chose to walk away, or that something must be wrong with your marriage. But no one hears what's actually happening because the contracts are designed to outlast the confusion. The psychological toll doesn't come from losing attention. It comes from watching your own narrative collapse without permission to defend it. And the very platform that made your life visible is now the wall that keeps you out. This kind of exit isn't clean. It lingers. It makes you afraid to post, afraid to speak, unsure of what's safe to say. Are you still under contract? Is that clause still active? Could one honest sentence about your exit trigger legal fallout? You start second-guessing everything. And the worst part? The people who still support you, who still want answers, don't know any of this. They think you've moved on, when in reality, you've been locked out. There's a strange cruelty in being remembered for your vulnerability, but not allowed to explain what happened when that vulnerability became inconvenient. Loren and Alexei were honest. They let fans see their wins and their breakdowns. And now, when everything's gone quiet, the show doesn't owe them clarity. The machine has moved on to louder couples. But their audience hasn't, because people don't forget the ones who felt real. And that's what makes this particular silence feel heavier. Not because they were the biggest personalities, but because they were trusted. And when you trust someone, their sudden disappearance doesn't just confuse you, it hurts. It makes you wonder who's still writing the script and why the people who lived it no longer get to speak. Fans aren't stupid. They know when something feels off. And the disappearance of Loren and Alexei didn't slip past them. It rattled them. Not because they needed drama from the couple, but because they could feel the gap. Something was missing. And the silence didn't match the pattern of two people simply stepping away. The timeline didn't make sense. The lack of goodbye felt forced. And the longer the show pretended nothing happened, the louder the viewers' questions got. You don't need inside knowledge to feel manipulated. You just need to pay attention to what gets erased and who benefits when the questions go unanswered. Loyalty doesn't come from spectacle. It comes from connection. Loren and Alexei earned that by showing up during the quiet moments, bed rest, postpartum depression, parenting stress, identity struggles, marriage therapy. Fans didn't tune in for chaos. They tuned in because the couple felt real. So when the franchise cut them off without a trace, it broke more than continuity. It broke trust. And that fracture didn't come from conflict. It came from the way reality TV keeps promising authenticity while treating its most loyal faces as replaceable content. You can't sell honesty and hide endings. Audiences remember what you show them, but they also remember what you don't. They remember who was edited out, who suddenly stopped posting, who got silenced after asking questions. And when the official channels stay quiet, viewers start building their own narratives. That's where conspiracy grows. Not from overreaction, but from being left out of the loop. Reality TV thrives on the illusion of transparency. But that illusion breaks the second the show starts picking which truths matter and which ones are too risky to tell. Loren and Alexei were marketed as the emotional anchor. The grown-ups. The success story. But the moment their story no longer fit the format, the network didn't clarify, they cut. And fans were left staring at the hole in the cast like they imagined it, like it was their fault for noticing. That's not ethical storytelling, that's narrative control. And it creates a system where trust isn't broken by lies, it's broken by omission. People know reality TV is curated. They're not asking for unfiltered chaos. They're asking for consistency. If a couple matters enough to be celebrated for 7 years, they matter enough to be explained when they're suddenly gone. But TLC doesn't explain. They delete. Not with malice. With precision. Because the less they say, the less anyone can hold them accountable. That's the part fans are starting to push back against. Not the content, but the treatment of the people they care about. How long do you expect viewers to stay invested when they're constantly being reminded that the truth is only welcome when it fits the storyline? Because once the audience starts sensing patterns, once the gaps become predictable, they stop trusting what they're shown, and they start paying closer attention to what's missing. Power in reality television doesn't come from popularity. It comes from paperwork. From contracts written in ways that make exposure feel like opportunity, while quietly locking cast members into long-term silence. Networks hold the cards because they hold the footage, the edit, the schedule, and most importantly, the rules. And once you sign, every move you make, on camera and off, is filtered through that system. Viewers assume cast members can speak up when something feels unfair. But the truth is, most of them can't. Not without risking fines, lost income, or permanent industry fallout. That's not protection. That's containment disguised as structure. When Loren and Alexei vanished, they didn't post statements, throw shade, or clarify anything. They vanished with restraint. Not because they wanted to disappear, but because the system made it easier to vanish than to fight. Because even if they tried to speak, the contracts they likely signed gave the network the right to control that narrative too. And if there's a conflict, it doesn't go public. It gets buried under legal threats and settlement language. Cast members don't win battles like this because the game isn't designed for them to win. It's designed to make their silence look like peace. Control looks calm from the outside when everyone inside is under pressure. That's why networks don't flinch when a familiar face fades. Because they've already moved on to the next cast. The next story. The next couple willing to sign the same terms. And the viewers, left in confusion, eventually stop asking. Not because they don't care, but because no one answers. The network doesn't need to defend itself when no one is allowed to challenge it. And if someone tries, the system kicks in. Legal blocks, media silence, brand damage. It's easier to ghost a cast member than negotiate with one who's asking for more than visibility. The structure protects the brand. Always. The contracts don't just limit what cast can say, they limit when, where, and how. And even after the cameras stop rolling, The control doesn't. Non-disclosure clauses stretch long past the last episode. The rules don't expire with the season. They carry into real life, which means a couple like Loren and Alexei, no matter how beloved, can disappear without explanation. Because that's the safest option for the machine behind the show. And the moment someone speaks publicly, the network can shift the story. Paint them as bitter, as difficult, as ungrateful. That's why most cast members stay quiet. Because the cost of truth is higher than the price of silence. And once that dynamic is set, it repeats. Over and over. Cast members play their part, stay in line, and eventually vanish while the show keeps going. Untouchable, unbothered, and always one step ahead of any fallout. So, who benefits when nobody talks? The answer is clear. Not the audience, not the cast. The silence protects the brand. The ambiguity protects the contracts. And the lack of accountability keeps the entire system running clean, without mess, without challenge, and without any obligation to explain where the people you once loved on screen went, or why they can't tell you themselves. This wasn't the first time. It won't be the last. Loren and Alexei didn't break the system. They exposed its rhythm, a quiet, repeatable rhythm that turns long-term casts into background noise the second they stop matching what the algorithm wants. Over the years, other names have disappeared just like them. Some came back briefly, most didn't. A few hinted at contracts, a few hinted at pressure. But the cycle stays intact. Give enough of yourself on screen, serve the narrative, drive attention, stay likable, but only until you stop serving the next phase of the format. Once that happens, the edits shrink, the invites stop, the silence kicks in. It's not random, it's planned. For newer cast members watching from the inside, the message is chilling. Even if you play the game right, even if you build a strong following, show growth, handle interviews well, and avoid public missteps, it doesn't guarantee longevity. Loren and Alexei did everything the right way. They became the couple fans could trust. They were consistent, emotionally open, and genuinely connected. They were the best case scenario for a show that often spirals into mess. And even that didn't protect them from the formula. Because the formula has one rule that always wins: nothing lasts unless it keeps escalating. If the safest couple can disappear, no one is safe from silence. Reality TV isn't built to sustain steady progress. It's built to refresh, to flip the cast, spark new reactions, and keep the platform moving. Stability doesn't stretch screen time. Familiarity fades quickly. And once a couple is no longer new, the network starts weighing their value not by their story, but by how many seconds they keep a viewer watching. That's why Loren and Alexei's exit matters. Not because they were the most dramatic, but because they weren't. Their removal proved that even if you succeed by every visible metric, the show can still drop you with no explanation. And this isn't just about fairness, it's about awareness. Viewers who think they're watching real life are watching edited patterns. Cast members who believe loyalty builds protection are learning that protection ends when the numbers dip. It's not about being beloved. It's about being useful. And once usefulness slips, even a little, the silence creeps in. Slowly. Until it takes everything. That silence is a warning. Not just to the cast, to the audience too. Because once the show starts editing out endings, it starts editing your connection to the people you've invested in. And you don't notice right away. You just feel the gap. You wait for an update that never comes. You search for a comment that isn't there. And slowly, you move on, without realizing how carefully you were guided into forgetting. So the question now isn't why Loren and Alexei disappeared. It's who's next. Who's already being softened in the edit? Who's being shown less? Whose updates are growing quieter? Because once you see the pattern, it stops being a surprise. It starts being a countdown. They never said goodbye because goodbye would have made it real. It would have made the exit visible, undeniable, permanent. But the silence? That keeps things vague. And when reality TV wants to erase you, it doesn't push you off the stage. It dims the lights, cuts the feed, and counts on the audience to stop asking. Loren and Alexei were the test case for what happens when being genuine, committed, and consistent stops serving the show. They didn't fall out of favor, they fell out of utility. And once their presence stopped feeding the algorithm, the system didn't correct. It deleted. Everything we've walked through leads back to that core pattern. Silence equals removal. No statement, no scene, no closure. Predictability equals risk. Stability becomes the very reason to end a storyline that once grounded the chaos. And visibility? That's the biggest illusion of all. Because visibility on screen doesn't mean control. It means you're useful until you're not. And when you're not, the same spotlight that once amplified your every breath becomes a blank space the show never has to explain. If silence feels calm, wait until you see who controls it. This isn't paranoia. It's protocol. The franchise has built a long-standing habit of removing people not with conflict, but with edits so clean they feel natural. Viewers stop seeing someone, then stop expecting them, then forget to wonder where they went. That's not accidental. That's design. A reality built not to reflect real life, but to serve the machine that keeps audiences locked in a loop of new chaos and fading memories. And Loren and Alexei? They were simply the next line in that loop. Not because they did anything wrong, but because they stopped serving the formula. Quiet love doesn't trend. Real growth doesn't spike views. And fan trust isn't worth much if it doesn't generate engagement. That's why their exit matters. It showed the full playbook. It showed how quickly safety becomes expendable, how easily contracts weaponize silence, how visibility turns into a leash the moment someone tries to speak with their own voice. And it showed how networks maintain power not by punishing disobedience, but by controlling what the audience sees. And more importantly, what they don't. No scandal, no confirmation, no explanation. Just absence. Because absence can't be questioned if nobody ever acknowledges it. What we're left with is a script designed to erase quietly, protect aggressively, and move on efficiently. Loren and Alexei trusted the system. For years, they gave the show some of its most honest, emotional, and grounded moments. They raised their children under contract. They brought fans into their real life. And when they were done serving that purpose, they were erased like it never happened. That's not storytelling. That's replacement. The show doesn't need continuity. It needs control. And if that's what happens to the safe couple, the reliable one, the one that represented everything the show claimed to celebrate, what happens to everyone else? Because right now, another couple is slipping into the same silence. The screen time's dropping, the narrative stalling, their posts are changing, and no one's saying a word. Not yet, but we are. In the next video, we're breaking down the early signs before the silence becomes permanent.